Blessings, everyone. I'm going to take about 10 minutes. This one will not be exhaustive, but I think that if I do some of this type of teaching in shorter increments of time, perhaps I can grasp your attention and give you some of this truth that I feel is absolutely vital in order for us to be able to navigate the future. I'm going to take about 10 minutes, maybe 15, and I'm going to explain this diagram that I've created to give you an idea on how fivefold ministry operates, specifically within the 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 28 text, which we read that the Lord has given us in the church, first apostles, second prophets, third teachers. The other text we're going to look at is Revelation chapter 1, verse 4, and it reads, John to the seven churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him. Now watch this. This is the key. Who is, who was, and who is to come. And from the seven spirits who are before his throne. We're going to look at the apostle, the prophet, the teacher, the who is, that's present, the who was, that's past, and who is to come, that's future. Teacher, apostle, prophet, past, present, and future. Now, keep in mind, this is my first time doing a teaching video set up with this form of structure. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see this little arrow that I got moving around on the screen right now. If not, try to follow me the best you can. What we're looking at here is the center of all things within the framework of time. Now, the book of Galatians teaches us in Galatians chapter 4 that Christ Jesus came in the fullness of time. Notice that what we're looking at here is a timeline, and this timeline is the ages. He comes in, this is Jesus, comes in the fullness of time itself. The word for time here in the Greek is chronos, where we get the word chronology. So it's consecutive time. It's time in the sense of a beginning and an end. It's the start to the finish. We could think chronology in the sense of something simple as the lifespan of any human. Somebody has a birthday, the day they were born, came into this creative cosmos, this earth, and then they have a day that they pass into the final judgment. So the span of their life from the start of their life to the end of their life would be the chronology. That is an age within ages. Of course, ages span from a human age to the age of a culture, to the age of an empire, to the age of many, many different things. Now, Jesus comes in the fullness of time. That means that all of time, from the beginning of time to the point where Jesus is manifest, is a consecutive arc of history, which means that we can look through the arc of history all the way up to the point of Jesus, and we can learn how to examine the mistakes. We can learn how to wrestle with cultural differences. We can learn how to look into the arc of history and look at the diplomatic history, as you can see in the chart over here, political history, cultural history, economic history, social history, and intellectual history. This is the arc of history that brings us to the present moment. Now, we have to keep in mind that we know that Jesus came historically somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 years ago. However, Jesus being the past, present, and future, and he lays it out even in a much more prolific way in the Revelation, where he teaches us that he is the first and the last, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. This is found in Revelation chapter 22, verse 13. Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, and the beginning and the end. Now, quickly, Alpha and Omega is very interesting because it deals with the first and the last Greek letters of the Greek alphabet. Simply put, when we look at perhaps, and this is obviously oversimplified, but nonetheless, this is just something to whet our appetite here. In John chapter 1, Jesus is the Word of God, the Logos. And of course, I've taught on this extensively in other places, but the word Logos has much more meaning than just the word, but keep it simple here. That means that Jesus is everything that God can speak of or put words together in the sense of who he is. So Jesus is everything the Father has to say about himself. He is everything that the alphabet can put together to say concerning who God is. So he is the alphabet, the dictionary of God. He is everything God has to say concerning his own person. He's the first and the last. Now, first and last is dealing with something where we get the Greek word protos and eschatos, or proton and eschaton, or protology and eschatology. So Jesus being what we would say the first and the last, it means that in the sense of God's creation, from the point of God saying in Genesis chapter 1, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Now, for your own personal homework, I would recommend or highly suggest that you look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28. I believe maybe going on to verse 29, where we read that when God makes man in his image, it is his goal to complete man after his own likeness. Note that I said it is his goal to complete man in his likeness, because the very next verse we read, so God created man in his image, male and female created he them. We don't read anything about the likeness of what man is, or what man is to become, until the fullness of time, that the God of glory in the person of the eternal Son enters into the human condition through the matrix of the womb of the Virgin, the Theotokos, Mary. And he enters into time itself. He enters into space itself. He enters into material existence itself in the form of a homoousian, in the like substance of humanity. This is why Paul would clearly begin to state that Adam, the first man, and then he contrasts with the last Adam, Jesus, the Messiah. So God becomes a man, a human, in order to take on, in a very vicarious way, the entire fall or the entire corrupted human condition and everything that the human condition's ever affected or touched. So from the point of the arc of history, from what we looked at, all of these different types of history, all of this finds its consummation in the Messiah in the fullness of time. That was 2,000 years ago, and it ends, watch this, very important we look at this idea, it ends on the cross. He's the first and the last, he's the beginning, and he is the end. Now notice on this diagram, the cross, I have here written proton and eschaton, which again is the first, he is the first and he is the last, which means that all of human history is consummated at the point of the cross. It means that God's plan, where God began his creation and he puts mankind in the earth, the image of God is in the first man, Adam, and his wife, Eve. But the finality of the image of God comes into the likeness of God when we see Jesus hanging on the cross, because it is only when we see Jesus at the point of the cross do we know what it really truly means to be fully human, not just merely human. So it is the journey to become like him, and to become like him is to learn how to fully become a living, breathing human being on this planet. This cannot be accomplished outside of the cross. It is the only way. So when we say as Christians that he is the way, the truth, and the life, we cannot for one moment move away from that essential foundational truth, because it is in Jesus that we're able to see what it is to be a living, breathing human, and we learn what it is to be like God, because God is the God who loved us so much that he would rather die in that he did on the cross than to spend eternity without us. Now, I know that a lot of people today teach eschatology, which is simply the study of final things, last things, the end things. It's the study of what some people call end times, last days, things such in that nature. But there's a reason why the early church did not focus on this. Now, in the Nicene Creed and in the Apostles' Creed, we recite it and we declare it, and it's a confession of our faith that Jesus Christ will return again to judge the quick and the dead, but it's left there. In other words, it's not fleshed out, because the scope of the future, if you're looking back on this map, the telos is what we're looking at now here. I'm contrasting the arche, what we see here on the other side of the cross, where we see the arc of history. Now, the telos is what we're talking about in the sense of the finality of, not just the finality of all things, but ultimately the journey that takes us to the end game. So within Christian theology, we're looking at an idea or a theological term called teleology. So it is the telos that we have to begin to understand, because it is the telos, or the what we call the finishing of all things, is the process from the point of the present that takes us into the what we would call the possible or the potential future. So what we're looking at, the potential future, is starts narrow because Jesus is the way, he's the truth, he's the life, and it spreads out because as we gaze into the future and as the future is breaking in upon the present, we have to learn how to abide here in the present moment. And this is important because the cross is the cross that will continue to bear within it the wounds of the sacrifice slain Lamb of God. Because as long as there's human suffering, as long as there's pain, as long as there is confusion, as long as there is darkness that's still present in this world, the wounds of the Lamb will always show. In other words, Jesus will continue to bear within his body the nail prints in his hands, the wound on his side, just like he told Thomas, thrust your hands in my side, touch my hands, see that I'm not a ghost. Because as long as there is human suffering, Jesus will continue to bear within his bodies the marks of his suffering, because it is through those marks of his suffering that he ministers healing to the cosmos. Now, when we talk about Jesus being the protos and the eschatos, in other words, the first and the last, we're looking at how the cross, as the eschaton, encompasses, and we're talking about the eschaton, encompasses all time, past, present, and future. So as the eschaton, he is also the proton, which means that all of creation is created for him. This is what we don't understand oftentimes. When the scriptures teach us that God made man in his image and likeness, that was not going to be fully realized until Jesus. The Lamb was slain from the foundations of the world. In other words, at the point of time, all of time in God has already been completed. We are just catching up to it. Jesus is always a step ahead of us, another step ahead of us. He always goes before us into our future so that we will have the right understanding, if we are being led by the Spirit, to know the path that he has set out for us. Why? Because he's already went before us and he shows us the way. So Jesus, as Dr. Mark Sharona would say, I think Dr. Leonard Sweet would say, that Jesus is in our future, calling us to the future, from the future. So he's already from the future, and he's calling us from our present to the future. And the future, or the telos, is the path that gets us there. It's teleology, or when Jesus said, think about it like this, when Jesus is hanging on the cross and he said, "It is finished." It's tetelestai, where we get the word telos. It is Jesus is saying, from the point of the overarching history up to the point of the cross, he says the telos, or the process that got us from one point to the point where Jesus is at, it's finished. And what is finished? The likeness of God. So the man listen to this. This is so cool. The man that God made in Genesis 1, the first Adam, is not finished until the last Adam, Jesus Christ. So in the image of God, he begins. In the likeness of God, he is finished and he's completed. So now God's absolute desire in his will is that none should perish, but all come to what? The truth. What is the truth? The truth is Jesus. Jesus is what it looks like to be fully human and fully God. He is the perfect paradigm of what mankind is to look like ultimately. Now, of course, we're on this journey to get there, and this journey is going to take time. So we're in a process of becoming who we already are, who we've already been made perfect in him. So as he is, so are we in this world, but it is a process of becoming who we already are. So if Jesus has already went before us throughout all time, he's in our future, calling us from the future to the future, then how do we get there? Well, we do that because the Lord has given us a church. And in the church, he's given us a fivefold ministry, as we read in Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and the didactic gift, or the teaching gift. Now, I want to narrow this down now to three, because I believe the evangelist and the shepherd will always function and operate around the center here of the apostle. So in other words, the apostle is the centrality of the one who understands foundation and mysteries of who Christ is in his kingdom. Now, to talk about this, we can't say that an apostle is the foundation no more than we can say the prophet is the foundation. So the foundation is built upon the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ being the chief cornerstone. This doesn't mean that the apostle and the prophet is the foundation. Rather, the apostle and the prophet are they, specifically speaking about apostles of the new covenant, prophets of the old covenant, though there are prophets in the new covenant as well, of course. But what we're looking at strictly here is that the foundation is not the apostle or the prophet. Rather, the foundation is the revelation that they carried, that they administered, and that they steward faithfully. So the stewardship of the kingdom is the mysteries of Jesus Christ and his church, and that is held and is protected, I guess I could say, by the apostolic and the prophetic. So the apostle and the prophet are foundational only in the sense that they are the ones who have had the vision of who Christ is. So the mystery of Christ is layered within the revelation of what apostles and prophets carry. If an apostle or prophet or a teacher does not carry the truth of the Christ and who he is, the mystery hidden from the foundations of the world, now revealed by his holy apostles and prophets, then we're missing it altogether. So whatever we're doing, if it's not pointing back to this cross, then we're missing it, because the cross is the centrality of the present moment. So if the cross is the centrality of the present moment, then every day is the fullness of time, because the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world finds the manifestation of this in history around 2,000 years ago, when the historical Jesus Christ hangs on the cross, and in his final breath, he cries, "Tetelestai," it is finished. God's plan for humanity is completed in the cross. Now we see what it looks like to be fully alive, because it's in death that death has been swallowed by life. And that life is not an event, no more than the proton, the eschaton is an event. Rather, it is a person. will always be a person because it has always been a person, and his name is Jesus. And if we're going to learn how to understand the possible future, we're going to have to learn how to understand the arc of history. So the narrative of history that gets us to here is going to give us the ability to navigate forward. So prophetic ministry, we're looking at it right here. Prophetic ministry is much more about the ability to lean into the possible futures. So that's the telos that the church needs. So the potential future is always available. But when we look at the potential future, we'll find out that there is the probable future. In other words, if we learn how to lean rightly into the past to understand the arc of history to bring us to the present, we can then begin to gauge through semiotics, future studies, the probable outcome that we're looking at. But just because the outcome that we look into, so look at it like this, we're gazing into the horizon of the future, and we say, this is what's coming. We can see the probable, and it doesn't look good perhaps. And if it doesn't look good, it doesn't mean that probable has to happen, because there's always the preferable. But what gives us the ability to move the probable to the preferable is understanding the changes necessary that need to be made to bring us into the possibilities of something much better than what we previously saw or thought would happen. So the idea of the prophet is that from this point of the cross, the prophet is to understand through the arc of history, so he leans heavily on the teacher. So the prophet cannot operate effectively apart from the teacher. So the teacher is the one who plunges the depths of history. He rides the arc of history, and he understands what brought us to the very point of where we are now. The prophet, then gleaning from the instruction of the teacher, then has the ability to look into the future, the probable, the preferable, and the possible. And as he sees what it is God is about to do, he rides the wake, or I would say the undercurrent. The undercurrent pulls out, and then the tide pushes in. So he takes the undercurrent of the future, pulling him, the future that's drawing us forward, pulling us forward. The undercurrent takes him into the future, and then he rides the wake of the possible, the probable, the preferable into the present moment. So the prophet is not as much about predicting what's to come way out there, that is a piece, but that even there can be very, very subjective. So what we're looking at is the ability to, through the study of trends, trajectories, understanding the arc of history, because the prophet is rightly aligned with the teacher, that in the future, then he sees what God's wanting to do, and he rides the wake of the future into the present. And just like Peter could do in Acts chapter 2, he can stand up and say, this was that spoken by the prophet Joel. Peter was able to step into the future for a moment because he saw what God was doing, ride it into the present moment, and announce this is exactly what God's doing. Now that's prophetic preaching. It is necessary for the church to stay fresh, to stay energetic, to stay hopeful, because the past by itself is not going to give us the hope for the future unless we're able to find the ability to bring what is we call the arc or arche, the first things, the past, and the future, the telos, who is actually a person, the eschaton, who is the eschatology, and together we are able to come right back into the center of all things. So rather you're operating as a teacher, whether you're operating as a prophet, you have to understand that both need each other, and both have to come and submit the revelation under what we would call authentic apostolic authority or apostolicity. This isn't, when I say submitting the revelation to the apostle, I don't mean modern day apostles per se. I'm not saying we don't do it that way today, but we have to make sure that we have the right blueprint here, because everybody calls themselves teachers, apostles, prophets, and so we have to make sure that the message they carry is legitimate, that it's not bastardized, that it hasn't been truncated or watered down in any form or fashion. And how do we do that? Once again, we have to learn how to probe the depths of history. Now, when we talk about the arc of history, specifically, say church history, plunging the depths of the first 4 centuries specifically, we're not going to be able to have a handle on what authentic apostolic authority or apostolic preaching is unless we understand what they understood going all the way back to Jesus and his 12 disciples. And let's take John and John's disciple Polycarp, and Polycarp's disciple Irenaeus, who actually wrote a book, which was actually a letter, called The Demonstration of Apostolic Preaching. And we begin to focus in on what does it truly mean to be apostolic? What does it truly mean to be prophetic? What does it truly mean to be one who can teach? And we're going to learn this, and we're going to move further and further into this as we continue. But I feel that it's necessary to get just a good handle on how time works in the essence of we call fivefold, which I'm only putting 3 here as in 1 Corinthians 12:28. Keep in mind, the evangelist and the pastor is going to operate within this circle here, because they must minister from the now. Evangelists have to get to people where they are in the present to bring them in, and pastors have to stay in the present moment so that they can shepherd the people in the present. But again, the teaching gift is going to abstract from the past. The prophet abstracts from the future, and together they're going to meet in the middle, drawing one from the other, so that what authentic apostolic ministry looks like is a very strong gift that has the ability to wrestle with history and to wrestle with the future together, so that we can have a present moment that looks like heaven on earth. And this is going to take time, of course, but this is the journey. This is the journey. I'll record part 2 on this soon in the coming days. I hope that this has helped. I hope this is going to bless you. If you have any questions concerning any of this, I'd encourage you to please reach out to me, put it in the comments, and I will do my best to get back to every single one of you. God bless you.